Hi, it's a pleasure to have you here. Subscribe to the channel and comment which city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 42 years old, and until recently I believed my life was calm, predictable, maybe even enviable. I live in Portland, Oregon, where I teach literature at a public high school and spend quiet evenings grading papers or walking through my neighborhood, never suspecting how fast everything can fall apart. I've always been the kind of woman who keeps her emotions under control, who believes in order, in trust, in routine. But now, every memory feels like a scene from a story I no longer recognize, like I was cast in a role I didn't audition for. I'm not who I thought I was anymore, not after what I saw near that river. I've been married to Daniel Carter for 15 years, and for most of that time, I believed we were solid, stable, even happy in our own quiet way. He's a construction engineer, practical, methodical, and always busy with projects that kept him out late or on the road. I was used to it, or at least I convinced myself I was. I had my own routines, my students, my books, the comforting rhythm of married life. We weren't passionate, not anymore, but I thought that was just what happens with time. We shared a home, holidays, friends, we laughed sometimes, we argued rarely. He wasn't the romantic type, but he was responsible, grounded, and I trusted him completely. Or at least, I did until everything began to slowly shift, like a house settling unevenly into the ground. Years ago, when things still felt like they had a future, we bought a modest country house near Bend, Oregon, tucked close to a wide, silver river that shimmered in the morning sun. Back then, I saw it as a symbol of our love, a quiet escape from the noise of the city, a place where we could grow old together. It had creaky floorboards and tall pine trees all around, and on summer weekends we'd sit by the water, barefoot and content. I'd read while he fished, and in those moments I truly believed we were building something lasting. The house felt magical, like a living memory made of cedar and stone, untouched by the chaos of real life. But dreams are fragile, and over time, that sanctuary began to feel distant, like it belonged to a version of us that no longer existed. I never imagined it would become the place where everything I believed would come undone. At first, it was occasional, a few weekends here and there when Daniel would say he needed to clear his head or finish some project at the house. He always framed it as practical, never emotional. The pipe's leaking. Or, I need to fix the porch before winter. I didn't question it because he never gave me a reason to. But slowly, those trips became more frequent, more urgent, and always without me. He'd leave without asking if I wanted to join, assuming I had plans or work to catch up on. And when I did offer to come, there was always an excuse. Too much dust, too cold, too isolated. It was subtle at first, but looking back, I realized he was pulling away from me one quiet weekend at a time. It started with little things. Missed calls, vague explanations, late returns that stretched later with each passing trip. He'd check his phone more often, step out of the room to take calls, and when I asked who it was, he'd say it was work, always work. There was a distance in his voice, like he was talking to me through glass, polite but unreachable. He stopped mentioning the country house in casual conversation, as if it had become a private space I wasn't meant to enter. I'd lie in bed waiting for him to come home, telling myself it was stress or the economy or just age wearing us down. But deep down, a cold, quiet voice had started whispering, "Something's wrong." And once that voice speaks, it never goes silent again. He always had a reason, and each one sounded just believable enough to quiet the doubt, but never for long. One weekend it was a broken water heater. The next a new roof beam that needed reinforcing before the rain hit. He spoke with such calm certainty that I found myself nodding, even when something didn't feel right in my chest. "It's not worth both of us going," he'd say. "I'll be back Sunday night, promise." But then Sunday would come and go, and he'd text that he was staying another day, or that something urgent came up. I started memorizing the pattern, how he never looked me in the eye when he packed, how he double-checked his phone before getting into his truck. He wasn't just escaping the city, he was escaping me. One night, after he'd gone to bed, I found myself staring at our wedding photo in the hallway, wondering if I was still that woman smiling beside him. I couldn't ignore the silence anymore. The blank spaces in our conversations, the way he pulled away when I touched his arm. I remembered a time when he used to tell me everything, even the smallest details of his day, and now I didn't even know where he was half the time. Doubt started to sink its teeth into my thoughts, and I hated myself for it. Hated the way I checked his call logs or looked for clues in his car. I didn't want to be that kind of wife, suspicious and insecure, but something deep inside told me this wasn't in my head. The truth was out there. I just didn't know if I was ready to find it. The moment came suddenly, without a plan, like a match striking in the dark. He was packing again, saying the same lines, barely looking at me, and I knew I couldn't go on pretending. I smiled, nodded, told him to drive safe, then watched his taillights disappear into the dusk. My hands were shaking, but my mind was clear. I had to follow him. I had no proof, no idea what I'd find, only a gut instinct that wouldn't let me rest. Something was happening at that house, and I needed to see it with my own eyes. I didn't feel brave, I felt desperate, but sometimes desperation is the only thing that forces the truth to surface. I told him I had a last-minute faculty meeting and kissed his cheek like everything was normal. Even though my heart was pounding, I watched from the window as he drove off, then quickly grabbed my keys and purse and followed, careful to stay far enough behind that he wouldn't notice. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than ever, each mile a reminder that nothing would ever be the same again. I didn't know what I'd say if he caught me. I didn't even know what I hoped to find. But it was too late to turn back. The questions had taken over, and I needed answers. I kept telling myself, whatever he's hiding, I have the right to know. I followed him through winding back roads, past the same pine trees and old signs we used to laugh at when we were younger. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. Not the light, not the silence, not the weight in my chest. His truck moved steadily ahead, never slowing, never swerving, like he'd made this drive 100 times without me. I stayed several cars behind, barely breathing, my eyes glued to his taillights as we passed the wooden bridge near the old orchard. That road used to bring me peace. Now it felt like the edge of a cliff. Every curve in the asphalt pulled me deeper into a truth I couldn't yet name but already feared. I told myself I'd turn back if he did anything innocent, but I already knew he wouldn't. Just before the house came into view, I pulled off the road and parked behind a dense line of fir trees, far enough away to avoid being seen. I turned off the engine and sat in silence, listening to the forest breathe, waiting for my heartbeat to slow down. I knew the back trails like the lines on my hand, so I took the narrow path through the brush, keeping my steps light, barely disturbing the fallen leaves beneath me. My pulse was racing, not from fear, but from the knowledge that everything I believed about my life was about to be tested. I crouched near the ridge overlooking the cabin, just close enough to see the porch without being spotted. The house looked empty, but his truck was there, and then the front door opened. I stayed hidden, barely breathing, as Daniel stepped outside and walked to the edge of the porch, scanning the woods like he expected someone to be there. I froze behind a tree, the bark rough against my skin, afraid that any movement would give me away. He seemed tense, his shoulders stiff, his face unreadable, and I realized this wasn't just another trip to fix a broken pipe. He looked like a man with a purpose, like someone about to do something he didn't want anyone else to see. I watched as he stepped back inside and returned moments later carrying something heavy. My stomach twisted when I saw what it was. He was holding a black suitcase, one I didn't recognize. Daniel walked quickly down the slope behind the house, heading toward the river with the suitcase clutched tightly in his hand. I moved silently through the trees, following from a distance, trying not to snap any branches or step on dry leaves. The wind picked up slightly, and for a moment I could hear the water rushing ahead, louder than my own thoughts. He didn't hesitate, didn't look back, didn't seem unsure of what he was doing. That scared me more than anything, the certainty in his steps, like this was already decided. When he reached the bank, he paused for just a second, glanced at the river, then lifted the suitcase as if it weighed nothing. I couldn't look away, even when every instinct screamed at me to stop watching. He didn't open the suitcase, didn't check what was inside, just stood there as if the river had been waiting for this exact moment. Then, with a single fluid motion, he tossed it forward, and I heard the dull splash as it hit the surface and began to sink. The current pulled at it gently, but it didn't float. It sank like something packed with lead. Daniel stood there, staring at the water, his face completely blank, as though what he had just done meant absolutely nothing. I pressed a hand against my mouth to keep from making a sound, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he'd hear it. This wasn't trash. This wasn't old clothes or broken tools. Whatever was in that suitcase mattered deeply, and he wanted it gone. There was no hesitation in his body, no second thoughts, just the quiet finality of someone erasing evidence. I couldn't explain the feeling in my chest. It was part rage, part horror, and part disbelief that the man I'd shared a life with could do something so cold. He stood at the water's edge for nearly a minute, watching as the ripples faded, then turned around and walked back up the hill like he'd taken out the trash. No guilt, no rush, no glance over his shoulder. I remained hidden, frozen in place, replaying the image over and over in my mind. That suitcase wasn't empty. I could feel it in my bones. And whatever was inside, he wanted buried beneath the water and forgotten forever. As he walked back to the house, I looked at his face through the trees. There was nothing there. No worry, no regret, not even relief. Just calm, blank detachment, the kind you see in strangers on the subway, not in someone you've slept beside for 15 years. That coldness broke something inside me, something I didn't even know was fragile. He wasn't panicked, wasn't checking to see if he'd been followed, which meant this wasn't the first time. I realized I didn't know this man at all, not really, and maybe never had. When he got in his truck and drove off minutes later, the silence he left behind was deafening. That's when I knew I couldn't leave that suitcase in the water. I had to see for myself. I waited until the sound of his truck faded completely, then counted to 50 just to be sure. My legs felt numb, my fingers ice cold, but I forced myself to move. The riverbank was steep, and the mud pulled at my shoes as I made my way down to the spot where he had stood. I scanned the water, trying to find a trace of the suitcase, a ripple, anything, but the surface had gone still again, eerily calm. Part of me hoped it had vanished, that I could go home and pretend none of this had happened. But that wasn't possible anymore. The man I thought I loved had just thrown a mystery into the river like it meant nothing, and I couldn't walk away from that. Just as I was about to step into the water, I heard something faint, almost drowned by the wind but unmistakable. A muffled noise, rhythmic, delicate, coming from somewhere beneath the surface. At first I thought it was a trick of my mind, my nerves playing with me after what I'd seen. But then it came again, clearer this time. A chime like the tinkling of a small music box. The sound was fragile, eerie, beautiful in a way that made my stomach turn. I froze, unable to believe what I was hearing because it meant one horrifying thing. Whatever was in that suitcase was still active, still making noise. My breath caught in my throat, and I knew I had to act. I didn't hesitate. I took off my shoes, rolled up my pants, and stepped into the freezing water before I could think twice. The current was stronger than it looked, pulling at my legs, soaking through my clothes within seconds. But I kept moving, eyes scanning the water for any sign of that dark shape. I slipped once, hit my knee on a submerged rock, but the pain didn't matter. The only thing I could hear was that distant, haunting melody getting louder as I pushed forward. Every part of my body screamed to stop, to turn back, but something stronger kept me going. I had to reach that suitcase. I had to know the truth. The river fought me with every step, and the cold felt like knives against my skin, but I didn't let go. I finally spotted the edge of the suitcase caught between two rocks, half submerged, wedged in place by the current. It looked heavier than I imagined, soaked through and covered in debris, but the music was still playing faintly from inside. I reached for it, but it slipped from my hands the first time, dragging me a few feet downstream before I regained control. My fingers were going numb, my teeth chattering, but I locked my arms around the handle and pulled with everything I had. My body was shaking violently, my lungs burning, but I didn't stop. I wouldn't let it sink again. After what felt like a lifetime, I managed to drag the suitcase to shore, collapsing beside it on the wet rocks, my breath shallow and broken. I stared at it in silence, water pouring from every seam. The lock rusted but still intact. My hands trembled as I reached for the zipper, unsure of what I was about to find, afraid it might be worse than I imagined. The music had finally stopped, but the echo of it rang in my ears. The suitcase felt like a tomb, heavy with secrets, wrapped in river mud and silence. Part of me wanted to walk away, to pretend I'd never seen it, but I couldn't. Whatever was inside belonged to me now, whether I wanted it or not. I sat on the riverbank, drenched and shivering, staring at the soaked black suitcase as if it might bite me. Every instinct told me to run, to leave it closed, but my hands moved on their own. The zipper was stuck at first, swollen with water and grit, but I yanked hard, forcing it open inch by inch. The first thing I saw was a pale blue fabric, folded neatly despite the water. My throat tightened as I peeled the top layer back, heart hammering in my chest. This wasn't trash. These were belongings, tiny, delicate, and heartbreakingly familiar. Whatever I thought I was about to find, I wasn't prepared for this. Inside the suitcase, half soaked and crumpled from the water, were baby clothes, tiny onesies, pastel hats, soft cotton blankets, all packed with impossible care. I pulled each item out slowly, hands trembling, unsure if I was awake or stuck in some feverish nightmare. There was a pair of white baby shoes with untied laces and a little blue pacifier clipped to a faded ribbon. Every piece carried a different kind of weight, not just physical but emotional, like they had once belonged to someone real. I felt like I was touching the ghost of a life I had never been told about. This wasn't forgotten junk. This was a child's world, hidden and discarded, and Daniel had thrown it into the river like it meant nothing. As I reached the bottom of the suitcase, the last thing I found was a small plastic music box shaped like a crescent moon, still playing a haunting lullaby through its cracked speaker. The sound was warped, off-key, but unmistakably meant to soothe a child. Except here in the middle of a forest, it felt like a funeral hymn. I held it in my palm, cold and dripping, unable to stop the flood of images crashing through my mind. A baby, a secret, a life Daniel never told me about. The music slowed, then stopped abruptly, leaving only the sound of the river and my breathing. In that silence, I realized something deeper had been buried here, something more than betrayal. A life. At the very bottom of the suitcase, protected in a clear plastic sleeve, was an envelope sealed tight despite the water. My fingers were stiff, numb from cold and shock, but I opened it slowly, dread wrapping around my ribs like a vice. Inside was a single document, official, stamped, undeniable. It was a birth certificate. I stared at it, my brain refusing to process the names at first, blinking to make sure it was real. The mother's name didn't ring any bells, but the father's name was printed in bold. Daniel Carter. My husband. My life. My lie. I read the certificate again and again, my eyes burning, trying to convince myself there was some mistake, some explanation that didn't destroy everything I believed in. The child's date of birth was only a few months ago, which meant this hadn't happened years before us, or in some distant past. This was recent. This was now. The baby had a name, a gender, a weight at birth, details I never thought I'd be reading on paper tied to the man I thought I knew. My hands went numb, and I dropped the document in my lap, staring at nothing, unable to cry, unable to move. My reality had split open, and I was standing in the middle of the wreckage. I don't know how long I sat there, soaked to the bone, the birth certificate in my hands like it was carved in stone. The river kept flowing beside me, calm and indifferent, as if the world hadn't just cracked in two. My brain tried to argue, to rationalize, but my body knew the truth before my mind could catch up. The man I married had another life, another child, something sacred he'd buried in lies and silence. It wasn't just infidelity, it was abandonment, it was cruelty, and I wasn't sure if I would ever find solid ground again. Questions poured in faster than I could contain them, rising like floodwater inside my chest. Who was the mother? Was she still in his life? Was the baby alive and safe? Or was this some horrible ending I didn't even want to name? What kind of man does something like this and goes home to kiss his wife goodnight? Every memory I had of Daniel felt infected now, fake, re-scripted, poisoned with doubt. I couldn't think straight, but I knew I couldn't ignore this. I needed answers no matter how much they hurt. Because if he lied about a child, what else had he hidden? I drove home on autopilot, the wet suitcase still in the trunk, my hair dripping onto the seat, hands barely steady on the wheel. I kept hearing the lullaby echo in my head, kept seeing Daniel's blank face as he watched it all sink. I wanted to scream, to smash something, but instead I opened my laptop as soon as I got inside. I couldn't rest until I knew who the mother was. The name on the certificate burned in my memory, and I typed it into the search bar with a trembling finger. I had no idea what I'd find, or what I was even hoping to find. I just knew I had to see her face. The name brought up dozens of results, some irrelevant, some vague, but then I saw a profile photo that stopped my breath. Samantha Brooks, early 30s, lives in Eugene, Oregon. Her face was soft and young, eyes tired but kind, holding a baby on her lap, maybe 5 or 6 months old. The caption under the photo read, "My whole world in one little smile." My stomach twisted because that smile wasn't just hers, it was connected to him. I scrolled through the pictures looking for clues and saw something else. In one photo, the baby wore the same blue pacifier I'd found in the suitcase. There was no doubt anymore. This was her. This was the woman Daniel had been hiding. Her page was mostly private, but the few public posts told me enough. Hospital visits, sleepless nights, baby milestones, all without a man in sight. There were no mentions of Daniel, no hints of support, nothing but her and the child, surviving one day at a time. I stared at her face, trying to decide what I felt. Rage, pity, sorrow, but none of it was clear. She didn't look like a seductress or a homewrecker. She looked tired, alone, human. And that made it worse because it meant she had a story too. And now I needed to hear it. I hesitated before messaging her, fingers hovering over the keyboard as if one wrong word could collapse whatever fragile truth I was about to uncover. I kept it short, direct, but not hostile. "Hi, Samantha. My name is Emily Carter. I need to speak with you urgently. It's about Daniel." I stared at the screen for several minutes before finally hitting send, heart pounding like I'd committed a crime. There was no response for hours, just that cold emptiness of waiting, checking, refreshing. I tried to distract myself, but my mind kept circling back to her face, her baby, that pacifier. When her reply finally came, it was only 3 words, but it was enough to make me stop breathing. "What do you know?" Her message hit me with a wave of tension I hadn't expected, short, defensive, and laced with fear. I could sense it wasn't just surprise, it was panic, like she'd spent months waiting for something to catch up with her. I wrote back immediately, choosing each word carefully. "Please, I'm not here to hurt you. I just need answers. Can we meet?" The typing indicator flickered on and off a few times before her reply came. "Fine. Tomorrow, 3 p.m. The River and Root Cafe downtown." I stared at the message, rereading it like it was a lifeline. After everything I'd seen, everything I'd pulled from that river, I was finally going to hear the truth from the only other person who lived it. I just didn't know if I was ready. The next day, the sky opened up with rain, the kind that soaks you even with an umbrella, as if the weather itself were bracing for what was about to be said. I arrived early and chose a corner table far from the door, where I could watch without being watched. When Samantha walked in, she looked around anxiously before spotting me, her coat clinging to her body, her eyes rimmed with sleepless shadows. She looked younger in person, but life had carved lines into her expression that no makeup could hide. She sat down without a word, gripping a warm mug the waiter brought her, as if it were the only solid thing in her life. I introduced myself softly, and for a long moment she said nothing. Then finally she whispered, "I know who you are." Her voice cracked as she spoke, hands trembling slightly, eyes refusing to meet mine. "I didn't plan any of this," she said. "We worked together on a construction site in Salem. I didn't even know he was married at first." Her pain was raw, not theatrical, not defensive. Just a woman unraveling under the weight of a secret too big to carry alone. She told me how Daniel had been charming, attentive, never wearing a ring, never mentioning a wife. "By the time I found out," she said, "I was already in love with him. And pregnant." She wiped a tear quickly with the back of her hand, like she was ashamed of it. I wanted to scream, to hate her, but all I felt was a hollow ache inside my chest. They had been involved for over a year, meeting in hotel rooms, sneaking around job sites, building a world made of silence and lies. She said Daniel had told her things weren't working with me, that he was planning to leave, that he just needed time. "I believed him," she said, her voice sharp with regret. "I believed every word because he made it sound like he was trapped, like I was his escape." I sat there in stunned silence, hearing how easily he had played both of us. 2 lives. 2 stories. 1 man. She looked down at her hands, ashamed. "I didn't want to be the other woman. I just didn't know I already was." Samantha told me she had found out she was pregnant during the worst month of her life, laid off, broke, and terrified. She expected Daniel to panic, to leave, but he didn't, not at first. He was calm, said he'd handle it, said we'd figure it out together. Her eyes filled again, but she held back the tears this time. She said he helped her find a new apartment, brought groceries, even talked about baby names once. I thought maybe this was real, maybe he meant it. But the closer she got to giving birth, the more distant he became. And one day, just like that, he disappeared. No calls, no messages. Just gone. "I knew he was married by then," she admitted quietly. "But I stayed anyway. That's on me." She wasn't trying to make excuses, just telling the truth, even when it hurt. I told myself lies to survive, that he loved me, that he was trapped, that I was helping him escape something terrible. Her words mirrored thoughts I'd once had in our own marriage, and it sickened me to realize how easily we both had been manipulated by the same man. She said she kept hoping he'd change his mind after the baby was born, but instead, he grew cruel, distant, irritated by any mention of the child. "He didn't just leave me," she said. "He erased us." She looked me in the eye for the first time, voice shaking but steady. "I'm sorry, Emily. I didn't mean to destroy your life. I swear I didn't know what I was part of until it was too late." I believed her, not because I wanted to, but because the pain in her voice was too real to fake. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She just wanted to tell the truth. I thought he was the victim, but he used both of us. Her fingers clutched the mug tighter, as if she could keep herself from breaking apart. I nodded slowly, unable to speak, because the truth was, I didn't hate her. I hated the man who put us both here. She said the last time she saw Daniel was the night she begged him to take responsibility, to at least see the baby once. "I didn't ask for money," she said, "just for him to look at his son and acknowledge he existed." But instead of compassion, he exploded, shouting, pacing, swearing that she had ruined his life. He said I trapped him, that I was nothing, that the baby was a mistake. Her voice broke again, this time with fury. "He scared me, Emily. He wasn't just angry, he was dangerous. And when she said those words, something deep inside me finally snapped. I had seen that same face, blank, cold, unshaken on the riverbank. And now I understood what it really meant. That night, after his outburst, Daniel stormed out of her apartment, but not before grabbing a small bag she'd packed with baby clothes and a few keepsakes. He said he was going to throw them away, that he didn't want any reminders. She tried to stop him, pleaded with him, but he pushed past her like she was nothing. I thought maybe he just needed space, that he'd come around. But days passed, then weeks, and he never returned. The baby was born without a father, without a name whispered in love, only silence and shame. And now, she said, voice cracking, I realize he meant it. He really wanted to erase us. As Samantha spoke, I felt a chill run through me, not from the rain still clinging to my coat, but from the realization that the suitcase I pulled from the river wasn't just symbolic. It was literal. The clothes, the pacifier, the music box, all of it had been hers. Her baby's. That bag, I said quietly. I found it. Her eyes widened, and she stopped breathing for a moment, lips parting in disbelief. I told her about the river, about the way Daniel threw it like trash into the current. She covered her mouth with her hand, as if trying to contain the scream building inside her. He really did it, she whispered. He actually threw away my son. That moment was the final thread snapping inside me. There was no more space for doubt, no more mental gymnastics to protect the man I thought I loved. I thanked Samantha, hugged her without words, and promised I would not stay silent. She had been abandoned, erased, and humiliated, but she would not be invisible anymore. As I walked away from the cafe, I could feel something hardening in my chest. It wasn't rage, it was resolve. Daniel Carter was going to face the truth he tried to drown. And I was done pretending not to see the monster he'd become. The drive home felt longer than usual, the streets a blur of gray, headlights and rain, but my mind was clear for the first time in weeks. I rehearsed what I would say, but I knew it didn't matter. This wasn't a conversation, it was an ending. I walked through our front door without even taking off my coat, letting the water drip on the floor as I stood in the middle of the living room. The house felt foreign now, like a museum of fake memories. I looked at the photos on the wall, the ones that used to comfort me, and saw them for what they really were, lies frozen in time. I didn't cry. I just waited. When Daniel walked through the door that night, carrying takeout and humming like nothing had happened, I felt a sickness crawl through my chest. He looked up, surprised to see me standing there, and forced a smile. Hey, you're home early. I didn't answer. I just stared at him, holding the birth certificate in one hand and the damp pacifier in the other. His eyes flicked to them, then back to me, and I saw the exact moment his facade cracked. What is this? He asked, voice already shifting into panic. You tell me, I said. Start talking. He tried to play dumb at first, confused, defensive, acting like I'd somehow misunderstood everything. This isn't mine, he said, pointing at the document as if it had forged itself. I don't know who that woman is. I didn't flinch. I told him I'd met her. I told him I knew everything. But he just kept lying, layering stories on top of each other, twisting timelines, accusing me of spying, of setting him up. You've always been paranoid, he snapped, trying to shift the blame to me. But it was too late. The truth was already out, and nothing he said could change what I'd seen. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just handed him the soaked birth certificate and watched him read it in silence. His hands shook. His face turned pale. He tried to say something, but no words came out. Then I dropped the music box onto the table, still damp from the river, and he recoiled like it burned him. Do you hear it, Daniel? I said softly. That's your child. That's what you tried to drown. For the first time, he couldn't speak. He just stood there, exposed like a coward facing a mirror he couldn't break. I saw it in his eyes. The truth had finally caught up to him. He sat down, head in his hands, and began talking in fragments, disjointed, pathetic, but honest. He admitted to everything. The affair, the baby, the fear, the lies. I couldn't handle it, he said, voice hoarse. I didn't want to ruin our life. I didn't know what to do. He begged me to understand, but I didn't. I couldn't. He had made choices, deliberate, cruel, irreversible choices. I didn't mean to hurt anyone, he whispered. But he did. And no apology could ever erase the weight of what he had done. Once the confession was out, he turned desperate, crying, grabbing my hands, swearing he still loved me. It was a mistake, he kept saying. I'll fix it. I'll be better. Don't leave me. His words meant nothing. They slid off me like water. I had spent years believing in a version of this man that never really existed. Now all I saw was weakness and cowardice wrapped in false charm. He promised everything but offered nothing real. And I knew then that this wasn't about betrayal anymore. It was about survival. Mine. I stood up, pulled off my wedding ring, and placed it on the table between us like a final sentence. We're done, Daniel. Don't call me. Don't follow me. You made your choice the day you threw your own child into a river. He tried to speak, but I turned away before he could twist the knife any further. My body felt heavy, but my heart was lighter than it had been in years. I wasn't walking away from a husband, I was walking away from a stranger. And whatever came next, at least it would be real. No more lies. No more pretending. I filed for divorce 2 weeks later, quietly, methodically, with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. There were no fights over property, no long legal battles. He signed the papers without a word. I left the house the same day, taking only what mattered. My books, my photographs, the parts of me that had survived him. I didn't look back as I drove away. I didn't need to. The woman I used to be was gone, and in her place stood someone stronger, someone who had seen darkness and chosen light. Leaving Portland felt like peeling off a layer of skin, painful but necessary. I didn't tell many people where I was going. I just packed up, signed the lease on a small apartment in Ashland, and started over. The first few weeks were disorienting, like living in a foreign country with no map, but I embraced the quiet. I got rid of everything that reminded me of Daniel, even the clothes I wore when we visited the country house. I needed space, not just physical but emotional. A new life couldn't grow in the ruins of an old one. And with every sunrise, I felt just a little more like myself again. I found a teaching job at a local high school, part-time at first, then full-time by the end of the semester. The students didn't know my story, didn't see me as a woman broken by betrayal. They just saw a teacher who loved poetry and expected their best. It gave me purpose, something stable to hold on to when the nights felt long. I started walking every morning, making coffee slowly, reading for pleasure again instead of distraction. I made friends cautiously, but I kept my past to myself, not out of shame, just to protect the quiet I had fought so hard to earn. Slowly, my days became mine again, and that was enough for a while. I kept in touch with Samantha through occasional messages, not out of obligation, but because something real had formed between us in that cafe. She struggled more than she let on, juggling a newborn alone, working 2 jobs, and living with her sister in a small duplex outside Eugene. She never asked me for anything, but I sent her diapers once anonymously just to help. She thanked me, not with words but with a photo, her son asleep on her chest, safe. I knew she carried her own guilt, her own shame, but she was doing what Daniel never did, showing up. And that mattered more than anything. Daniel never visited the child, never called, never sent $1, not even after the truth came out. It was like he had cut that part of his life out of existence, like it had never happened. Samantha told me once that she thought about suing him but didn't have the strength or money to start a fight she wasn't sure she could win. He had returned to his job in Portland, pretending to be the same man he'd always been, but cracks were forming. People noticed his temper, his absences, the way he drank more than he used to. He thought he'd escaped the consequences, but he hadn't. Not for long. Samantha eventually lost her job at the design firm when they downsized, and with no backup, she had to take work cleaning offices at night. Her body was exhausted, her eyes hollowed by stress, but she never let it affect the way she held her son. She carried him everywhere in a sling strapped across her chest, humming to him softly even as she wiped floors and emptied trash cans. I visited her once unannounced and she didn't even flinch, just hugged me and offered tea in chipped mugs. There was no bitterness in her voice, just quiet endurance. She was surviving. Barely. But with more dignity than Daniel ever had. The news came to me in pieces, through mutual acquaintances and the occasional forwarded email. Daniel had been fired from his firm after multiple HR complaints, verbal abuse, missed deadlines, erratic behavior. He was seen arguing loudly with clients, once even showing up drunk to a site meeting. His career unraveled the same way our marriage had, slowly at first, then all at once. I felt no joy in hearing it, only a strange, quiet justice. He hadn't been punished by courts or police, but by life itself. His lies had caught up to him just like I knew they would. Samantha finally filed for child support through the state, and Daniel responded the way cowards do. He ignored every notice. He missed court dates, failed to submit financial documents, and when a warrant was finally issued, he acted shocked. He called me one night from a number I didn't recognize, desperate, asking if I could help him explain things. I hung up without saying a word. That wasn't my life anymore. If he wanted to avoid responsibility, he'd chosen the wrong woman to manipulate. Samantha deserved every dollar, and he deserved every consequence. Months later, I got a letter forwarded to my new address. A court document confirming Daniel had been jailed for contempt after refusing to comply with the child support order. He'd spent years burying the truth, only to end up caged by it. I sat with the letter in my lap, unsure how to feel. There was no joy, no triumph, just a deep, still sense of closure. For the first time, the past didn't feel like it was chasing me anymore. It was behind me. Done. The man who tried to erase a child had finally vanished from my world. And I could breathe again. With time, the memories dulled. Not erased, but softened like scars after healing. I stopped checking Samantha's social media. Not because I didn't care, but because I trusted she was okay. I didn't wonder about Daniel anymore. Didn't imagine revenge or second chances. My life was quiet, solid, and for the first time in years it felt entirely mine. I no longer flinched when I heard a lullaby or saw baby clothes in store windows. The pain had become something else, something folded and stored, no longer heavy to carry. The chapter was closed, and I had survived. 10 years passed almost without me noticing. I stayed single, not out of fear, but because I needed time to rebuild what had been shattered. I traveled. I read everything I never had time for. I spent weekends in silence, learning to enjoy my own company. There were men who came and went, kind enough, but none who stayed. And that was okay. I wasn't looking for rescue. I wasn't waiting to be loved again. I was learning finally to love myself. And that was the beginning, not an ending. It happened on a Saturday morning at a bookstore cafe, of all places, where life had returned to quiet and love was the last thing on my mind. I was browsing the travel section when someone asked if I'd recommend the book in my hands, and I looked up to see a man with kind eyes and a soft smile. His name was Michael Thompson, a widowed businessman who had lost his wife to cancer 5 years earlier. We started talking, then meeting for coffee, then sharing long walks and slow dinners that felt like warmth returning after a long winter. He never pushed, never rushed, he just listened. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was rebuilding. I felt like I was living again. Michael showed me what love could be when it wasn't built on secrets or fear. He opened doors, not out of habit but out of respect. He remembered the way I took my coffee, the books I loved, the way I avoided crowded places when I was tired. He never tried to fix my past, he just made space for my present. With him, there were no masks, no guessing games. It was calm, steady, and full of quiet moments that slowly rebuilt the trust one thought I'd lost forever. One evening, under a sky full of stars on his back porch, he took my hand and said, "You never have to doubt me." And I believed him. We married in a simple ceremony surrounded by close friends, laughter, and the kind of peace I once thought was a fantasy. There were no big speeches, no dramatic vows. Just two people who had lived through loss and found each other on the other side. We bought a small house with a garden I could finally call mine, where I planted lavender and mint and let the seasons pass without fear. I never thought I'd feel this safe again, this whole. And yet here I was, loved, respected, seen. Michael gave me something Daniel never could, the freedom to be exactly who I am. And in that freedom I bloomed. Now when I look back at that chapter of my life, the river, the suitcase, the betrayal, I don't feel bitterness anymore. I feel gratitude, not for what happened, but for what I became because of it. I survived the wreckage, rebuilt from the ashes, and found a love that was never built on illusion. Daniel is a ghost I no longer carry. Samantha and her son are somewhere out there, living their own story, and I wish them peace. As for me, I've closed the door on the past with no need to reopen it. I found my truth, my voice, and in the end, I found peace.